All right, let's jump right in. Today we're exploring a pretty radical idea, a complete vision for society that grows from just one single core principle. We're going to be diving into the philosophy of Murray Rothbard. So let's start with a little thought experiment. Can you imagine our entire complex world, all the laws, all the regulations, being run by just one simple rule? No exceptions, no loopholes. Does that sound like a recipe for a perfect world or for total chaos? That's really the central question here. And here it is. This is that one rule. It's called the non-aggression principle, or the NAP for short. And the idea is, deceptively simple. No one is allowed to start a fight. You can't initiate force or even threaten to use force against another person or their stuff. That's it. That is the one and only rule of the game. Now, this principle isn't just some nice moral suggestion. It's like the first domino in a huge line. As we're about to see, once you accept this one rule, a whole series of logical conclusions about society, about rights, about government, they all start to fall, one right after the other. It's all connected. So how does this one rule build up into a whole system of rights? Well, it all starts with the logic of ownership. We're going to trace the steps that connect this simple rule against aggression to the entire concept of private property. Okay, so the logic here unfolds in three pretty straightforward stages. It all begins with the most fundamental idea you can imagine, self-ownership. You own your body. Simple, right? And if you own your body, then it just follows that you must also own your labor, the work you produce. And finally, when you take that labor and you mix it with some unowned resource, say you clear a field or build a house on unused land, you homestead it. That resource now becomes yours. And this homesteading idea, it's absolutely crucial. You got to think of it as the bridge, right? It's the bridge that connects your own internal effort, your work, to actual, tangible ownership of things out in the real world. It's the mechanism that makes property rights a logical extension of just owning yourself. Okay, so if the only rule is don't initiate force, then applying this rule consistently forces us to ask a kind of awkward question. Who is the biggest initiator of force in society today? And from Rothbard's perspective, the answer leads us to take a very critical look at the state itself. To really get this critique, we need to bring in a key distinction from a sociologist named Franz Oppenheimer. He basically said there are only two ways to get wealth in this world. There's the economic means, that's making things, trading, voluntary exchange, and then there's the political means, that's taking things through force and coercion. This philosophy argues that everyday people use the economic means, but the state operates almost entirely through the political means. So if we take that non-aggression principle and we apply it consistently, well, suddenly a lot of the everyday, totally accepted things that governments do start to look like systematic violations of that one fundamental rule. Let's see how this reframes some pretty common state activities. First up, taxation. Because it's not a voluntary payment. Just try not paying and see what happens. This philosophy defines it pretty bluntly as theft. It is the taking of property without the owner's consent, backed up by the threat of force. And following that same logic, conscription, the military draft, is seen as a direct violation of self-ownership. By forcing someone into service against their will, the state is basically claiming ownership over their body. And from this perspective, that's a form of slavery. And this leads to what is, for many, the most jarring conclusion of all: war, which is the organized initiation of violence on a massive scale against people who haven't personally attacked you, gets reframed as mass murder. Rothbard used this really powerful metaphor to describe how people who hold this view see themselves. They feel like they're the little kid in the story of the Emperor's New Clothes, just pointing out a plain truth that everyone else seems to be ignoring. That the state regularly does things that we would all call criminal if anyone else did them. So this obviously leads to a huge question. If you get rid of the state, what's left? How do you stop everything from descending into total chaos? Let's take a look at how this philosophy tries to answer those really big practical objections. And yeah, this is almost always the first question people ask. Okay, fine, but what about security? Who's going to protect us from the bad guys if there's no government police force? The answer from this viewpoint is the market. Instead of a single government monopoly on security, you'd have a whole competitive marketplace of options. You could hire private security firms. Maybe your insurance company would offer protection services to lower its own risks. Or communities could just form voluntary neighborhood watches. All right, the next big question is just as critical. Without a government, who writes the laws? Who runs the courts and helps people settle their disagreements? And here again, the proposed solution is a voluntary market-based system. You could imagine private arbitration agencies competing for your business based on their reputation for being fair and just. The law itself wouldn't be written by politicians. It would grow organically over time from the decisions of these respected private judges. And enforcement? That might be handled by insurance companies or just by the very powerful social pressure of a good or bad reputation. Now, these ideas might sound really strange and new, but it's important to understand that Rothbard didn't see himself as inventing something totally from scratch. He actually saw his work as reviving a very long and powerful tradition of thought. You can trace the intellectual roots of this idea way back. There's a clear line from John Locke's ideas about natural rights in the 17th century, right through the American Revolution's defense of liberty against the power of the state. In Rothbard's telling, these original classical liberal ideas got watered down over time. His whole goal was to bring them back, purify them, and apply them consistently to the modern world. So at the end of the day, if you boil this entire philosophy down to its absolute essence, this is the vision you get: a society where everything, from the economy to our personal security, is organized through voluntary cooperation, not through coercion and force. And that leaves us with the ultimate question that this philosophy really forces us all to confront. And it doesn't matter if you agree with its conclusions or not. It's a question that's right at the heart of all political debate. When it comes to how we all interact with each other, what's the right balance between choice and force, between the voluntary and the coerced? That's really something to think about.